Hello, and welcome back to Falling Walls Breakthrough Conversations, a safe and quiet space for interaction with global leaders, outstanding scientists, emerging innovators, and science entrepreneurs, focusing on their individual research, career paths, and experiences. As always, you in our audience are encouraged to participate and interact through the session. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the raise hand functionality in Zoom, press the button. You'll be spotlighted, unmuted, and then I'll invite you to ask your question. If you have any technical questions, please add those into the chat and one of our technical moderators will get back to you. The session will be recorded and will be made available on the Falling Walls content library after the Science Summit's completed. I'm Nicola Jones, and I'm the Head of Publishing for the Springer Nature Sustainable Development Goals programme. And for the next 25 minutes, I'll be talking to Frank Niederländer, who is a member of the board of the BMW Foundation Herbert Quant. So Frank, welcome.
Thank you. We're really happy to be here.
Now, to start things off, it would be great to hear a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm, as you mentioned, member of the board of the BMW Foundation. I can tell a little bit more about later on that. And it's now for 4 years after being a long-term manager in various functions in the automotive industry. So I know both sides, the industry side, and now the much broader perspective of the cross-sectoral foundation.
Wonderful. And the BMW Foundation supports emerging leaders as well as a number of startups. So perhaps we could talk about both of those dimensions today. So it will be interesting to hear what responsible leadership in science means to you.
I'd love to do that. What we are facing right now, and I think it's no need to see, it's a huge transformation. Right now in Glasgow, we have a lot of debate about the climate action we have seen in the pandemic, a huge crisis which have been solved by also science in terms of solution. And what's needed is a time of change. And we at the foundation, and that's in the core of our mission, believe in the human potential, so in the individual potential for change. And in addition to that, and that's why we are promoting responsible leadership, we believe that leaders, due to their role, can leverage that and be kind of multiplicator and increasing the impact of the action. What's needed, and that's what we call responsible leadership, is a kind of guidance. It's a kind of attitude, how you do your leadership. The basic frame for us are the Sustainable Development Goals, so the 2030 Agenda of the United Nations. We had been committing right from the beginning, 2016, on that, and that's our North Star in terms of where we want to go. But it's more than that, because you need a kind of mindset, and this mindset, it's not only a technical or instrumental one, how to reach that, but it copes with attitudes like openness, being open to cooperate, to co-create with stakeholders you are normally not acting with, people with different values, different means of understanding on wording. And I must say, coming from an industry, you realize how normally in your peer you are clear and you understand the mechanics. But once you enlarge that footprint, it's a completely new game. And to train that, to learn that, to empower a new generation, which I think is perhaps even more open than we had been ourselves, that's our mission.
And how do you go about training that? This seems like skills actually that would be quite difficult to learn. It's a completely different mindset, as you've said. What do you do to help facilitate this in the next generation?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like being one training program. It's more a portfolio of activities ranging from convening people in terms of conference, but or smaller settings. We call them leadership program, where We would go with a group of 30, 40 people for a couple of days discussing different important global challenges, but always having a diverse group of people. But we are also doing concrete programs like an accelerator program called Respond, where we train startups who focus on bringing sustainability in their core business. We have a program called Rise Cities, where it's about stakeholders in city governance, but in also participation with citizens. But we are also doing active investing. So, for instance, impact investing is a very strong element where we are trying to promote it and where we are investing even ourselves. So it's no simple, it's complex, and I think you need several touch points, and different stakeholders need different means how to get an understanding about the leadership element.
I think it's almost an understatement to say that it's complex. It's incredibly complex. So it's fantastic to hear about the kind of practical things that the foundation is doing to help facilitate this.
Thank you.
And you mentioned previously that when you work with your peers in your industry group, there's a kind of common understanding, and then when you start to collaborate across different sectors, that's when more work is needed. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you see the need for cross-sector collaboration for a sustainable future?
Absolutely. I mean, one strong element beyond the programs I mentioned is our network. We're talking about around 2,000 people globally distributed from different areas, from all parts of society. And the key is that you have that collective intelligence in a way to exchange idea perspectives, learnings from different parts of the world, always around the main global challenges we want to solve. To come to your question, I think at the end you could even call it negotiation, because different stakeholders do not perhaps see a difference on the challenges we have, but the huge element often is the way to solve them. And that's why for me it's so important to get this cross cooperation, this co-creation, this openness to discuss, to have boundaries where all stakeholders can agree on certain paths. And I think that's the biggest challenge, for instance, now on the climate discussion. You have some will say, okay, stop things so immediately, and others say, okay, we need that time, and who's right, who's wrong. No one has an answer. But to create an atmosphere and create an openness to have a discussion where you have the feeling there is a kind of fairness and an acceptance of different perspective, and to build trust at the end. That's the only way where we see a change is really possible.
I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, in my role as a publisher who's looking at how the research that we publish can help achieve the global agenda, I think all the time about how we can facilitate that kind of cross-sector collaboration. I think there's a lot we can learn from what you're doing. Those of us who are engaged in these kind of science-adjacent roles.
Absolutely.
So what do you see as the role for sustainable business and technology in moving us to a sustainable and crucially a just future?
Actually, I'm much more optimistic than when I was starting in the foundation, because it's interesting to see the switch and the perspective when I read and was like, okay, those challenges, however, we will tackle those. But I've seen also a tremendous dynamic also on the industry side, and also in established stakeholders over the last 2 years, especially in terms of the climate action, of course. But you see also, and I told you, we are investing things like ESG, where suddenly the sustainability element comes into really hardcore markets like the financial markets and drives change. And that drives at the end important transformation, which is not only for those who are the front runners or the niche of those people who want to change, but it's touching the mainstream. And that's lead for me to a bigger change than we had been seeing. And for me, the simple example is, in the past, sustainability or CSR had been specialized departments in any organization. And now this is moving to the core. And that's a huge difference, because then the bigger investments, the bigger resources are allocated to drive sustainable change. The remaining question is, what is your benchmark? What is the target? What are the standards when you talk about sustainability? That's, in my view, the current discussion which is not solved yet, and there's no agreement on where we are going there.
Fantastic. I think I would agree with you. I think you're definitely right that sustainability is becoming now part of what whole companies are thinking of. The need for a separate division or a separate team it's just less and less, and that's incredibly encouraging. So the BMW Foundation, as we've talked about, is highly involved in the startup world. Can you tell us more about the contribution startups are making to sustainable transformation?
You know, when you talk about transformation, you are wondering, where do you find a great narrative? Where it's a vision people could rely to and get inspired. You know, and the element of a startup or any new business is to create something new, to create innovation, to break patterns, to find new approaches. And this positive mindset is more or less the DNA of startups. And as we believe both in leadership, but also in the idea of entrepreneurship as an important element to drive change, the idea to go into the startup world was very intriguing for us at the end. And what we were targeting in addition was to say two things. One is we wanted absolutely startups looking at sustainability in their core. And second, looking at technology, because technology needs long-term investment, it needs a different commitment, it needs really an in-depth understanding how you want to tackle problems. And we did this. We were starting 2 years ago, and I'm amazed how big the resonance of startups to apply here was there. But the more important element, and that's for us beautiful to see, is the community which is building around. Because those startups are role models which attracts but also attracts other established investors, established founders, and by that you create that leverage I was talking about earlier on.
That's interesting, because in a number of the conversations we've had today, we've talked about the importance of collaboration and tensions around collaboration and competition. And there has been a kind of the general theme of the discussions today has been that everybody needs to work together. And so what you've just described with the community that's built up, it sounds as though actually, learning is being shared across the startups that you guys are involved with. Is that right?
I think it's you have to look at it in a different way. What I learned on that was one of the biggest changes coming from the industry world in the foundation world is that you are coming from a competitive setting where you try to protect things more to collaborating open source elements. So that was a huge difference in seeing especially that you needed its openness, because you have to cope with stakeholders and areas you don't know. And the only way to do that is by cooperating with that. What's happening, however, and I also strongly believe still in the competitiveness in terms of excellence. You need to drive change. You need excellence. That's not contradictory to cooperation. If we select startups, we have seen hundreds of applications where at the end 10 would be the ones coming to the program. So this competitive element, this excellent element, you can process this. And I think there are a lot of good intentions, but at the end, it's what's the excellence of the execution, what's the whole business model. It remains an enterprise, which is assessed as any normal enterprise too. And I think that's needed to really manage a true change with sustainable at the end. And I think that we have a great example on bioscience last year. Otherwise, no one had as quickly vaccines that we had now.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. It's wonderful to be able to show my vaccine pass at the conference every day.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you have any advice for anyone in our audience or who might be watching later who's considering launching a science-based startup?
I don't want to mention concrete names, not to advertise that, but I'm seeing more both funds coming up, which are more based on science-based targets, information, and to do that. And I like what Falling Walls thinking about the idea of a sciencepreneur, because I think especially the very big transformation, again, coming back to life science, needs research, needs patient capital, needs a long-term perspective, and creating business out of that it's a huge task. We try to foster much more, especially in the European context. I think there are great examples overseas, both in East and West, and we have a potential here to get better, to bring it to the mainstream. And science, for me, is the key for really the big transformation, the big complex problems we are facing right now.
Yeah, this is what scientists do, right?
Absolutely,
think about these.
Absolutely. We have, the issue is, and that's again what I like with Falling Walls, we have more separation with the basic research and then the application on the commercial side. The whole process and the community and the culture is not as developed as we would like to see that, and whether it's on bio or on sustainability. So, and I think that's a cultural process we will need to foster, and where I'm building on the next generation of entrepreneurs and scientists really to be a key role in that transformation.
Thank you. So turning back to you and your experience, how did you find that transition from industry to the world of foundations?
There are two elements on that. I was always curious to enter the world of foundation, to have this broad perspective. I was always wondering whether I would miss the doing part you're used to be in the industry side. And happy to see that in the foundations world, you are quite more flexible than you expect to be, and you can create stuff. And that's what we have done, what we could do. And at the end, you can apply knowledge, what you're used to have in the corporate world, to do good for society and good for future developments. And you see more and more also entrepreneurs, other peoples moving on the philanthropic side, but using their same competences to engage much more and to professionalize perhaps the transformation from our perspective.
Fantastic. And how do you see the program at the BMW Foundation evolving in the future?
It's a great discussion we are doing. We are amazed about the success and the need of that program. So for me, talking about in the language of entrepreneurs, it's about how to scale it now, how to grow in the next phase, how to develop it further without losing the focus, and the same mindset and the attitude. But I see there's a huge potential to grow and to partner, especially as I mentioned, with, as I call it, the established world, the established industry, established governments, because I think that mindset change, that's the crucial element for the transformation, and that's where we have some experience on.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. We are just about coming to the end of our time, Frank. So just one final question. I'm interested to know how you feel sustainable development in the sense of the 2030 agenda. How will we achieve it by 2030?
Actually, there are two elements. For me, it was always important to have the 2030 agenda as a very important date and a lighthouse. Being in 2021, knowing industry processes and investment process, technology process, I think that the 2030 time point is a very important milestone, but not at the final target as it had been targeted. So, Paris, we're talking about 2050 in Paris Agreement. So I think, and that's what we were promoting now coming the next decade. I think 2015 to 2020 had been an important phase to promote the sustainable development goals. Now it's about going to action. And for me, the most important is to see how will we ramp up activities to come as close as possible to the targets. I don't believe that the 2030 agenda will be fulfilled. I believe probably there will be a following agenda, but it remains an important milestone.
I think I would have to agree with you there. I'm looking forward to seeing where we get to by 2030. I think things are accelerating at the moment, and I think there's a lot to be hopeful about.
Exactly, yeah. And it's tomorrow. 9 years from now, it's nothing. No.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been
Welcome.
A really fascinating conversation. I really appreciate the level to which you were prepared to talk about this. Thank you everybody who has joined us today for the Falling Walls Breakthrough Conversations. The conversations will be back tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Berlin time, where our moderators will be talking to the winners of the Falling Walls Breakthroughs of the Year across 7 different categories. Thank you all very much and goodbye.